Hi, everybody. It's Judi, and welcome to the Burnout Solution series. And today is day one. And I've collected some of the best experts for you to teach you about how to have your own burnout solution. And I'm excited because today is all about awareness. Know your strengths and your burnout blind spots, whether it's in your business, maybe a physical issue, or maybe on the spiritual level, so that you can really let go of some of the habits and behaviors that are holding you back. Plus, I want to remind you that we're going to be meeting every day throughout this online series in our Facebook group called the More Than Enough Women Circle. I'll be live in the evening, so don't miss my daily recap and highlights. Plus, I'll be there to answer any of your questions because I want to make sure that you can take action on all the tools and skills that you've learned each day. So if you haven't already, hop on over to the More Than Enough Women Circle. So before I kick things off, I want to introduce today's expert. Her name is Giovanna, and she is a transformational coach, speaker, and host of her weekly podcast called She Rises. As both a trained alternative medicine doctor and spiritual teacher, this self-professed nerdy girl bridges the art and science of alternative healing concepts and deep coaching to support successful women seeking to find their next level of meaning, purpose, and vitality in their lives. And today we're going to focus on the topic of how to recognize the 3 levels of burnout to thrive. Hi, Giovanna. How are you? I'm so grateful to have you here.
I'm fantastic. I'm honored to be on the program, on the show, being interviewed by you.
Well, great. And I really want to jump right into the first question. And I've been asking everybody this question, but it is like, what do you think is behind this epidemic of overwhelm and burnout that we're seeing today, in your opinion and your experience with the businesswomen that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, my opinion on that, what I see happening is what's behind it is a striving and seeking for some level of significance or fulfillment. That it's almost like trying to fill a cup with an empty bottom, right? It's like trying to fill a cup that has a hole in the bottom, and we're just trying to keep filling it and filling it. And we are unfortunately conditioned by the society that we're in that do more and be better and get higher and like hustle, hustle, hustle. And like, I'm not going to name names, but there's people out there that, promote the hustle. But if you're hustling without actually knowing what's behind that, it's actually what's underneath that is trying to fill a need for significance or, any range under significance, being important, being loved, being worthy, being valuable. Any of those iterations of significance, I believe, is at the core of why we do way too much and eventually burn out. And we're sort of, I speak more only to women, there's a level of self-abandonment there where I'm not connecting to self and I am seeking to find connection or meaning in all these other places. So that's been my experience personally. It's also been my experience with the clients that come and work with me one-on-one. And I just see it happening for men and women, really.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I really want to underscore, like, there's been at least 4 golden nuggets that you've said already, and we've just started.
Just begun. Okay.
We've just begun. But the thing that I want our listeners to remember is, like you said, if we're seeking fulfillment or significance and we're trying to do it with the hustle, right? It's the energy that hustle rides on. Because to your point, I've heard those people too that talk about hustle, 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 and it makes me cringe. Yeah. And there are some women that I've seen that have that level of hustle that do it with ease and grace. There's not a whole lot of them, not a whole lot of those role models. But I totally agree with you that there has to be that the energy that the hustle rides on. Because if it comes from that empty place, right? That I totally get what you're saying. And I love also, I want to dig a little deeper into what you just said about self-abandonment. Because, people I don't think they realize what that looks like, or, why don't you explain a little bit more about what you mean by it? And then I'll ask you a little bit more about it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm writing a whole book about it right now. Self-abandonment to me is, the way in which we disconnect from ourselves, right? You disconnect from you and I disconnect from me. And then we do things that try and fill our external needs, oftentimes to our detriment, because we're just settling for the little bit we can get because we're disconnected from actually our own inner core, our own self. What are our needs? Is it okay to be needy? You know, the N word has been a bad word for women. Like you're needy and you can't, but all needy means is that your needs aren't being met. And so are you going to seek them outside of yourself and settling for just the breadcrumbs that you can get? Or are you actually seeking to make connection within yourself? And so for me personally, if I bring it back to me, my seeking lovability or significance or success really had to do with this empty place inside where I was disconnected from self. I was disconnected from source. And I was ultimately not able to be the best that I could be in my business, in my relationships, in my life. Because if you're not connected to self, then you're not bringing the totality and the wholeness of who you are. You're not actually able to even ask for your needs to be met. And so that's why we kind of skirt around the edges and we settle and we self-abandon what actually is congruent with, you know, being a whole person is how I would describe that.
Yes. And again, I want to underscore a few things that you just said, which are so great, is that, yeah, we've been taught that our needs, and like, it's a bad thing to have needs, and we're kind of quieted or pushed aside by that. But it's the fact that what you were saying is that asking for what we need. There's also that ability for us to ask, but that is even something that we don't do because we've already been shamed that we even have the needs.
That's right.
We have. So it's like there's a little bit of shame that, in my experience, it's like there's shame that's been conditioned into us, like, don't have needs, you take care of everybody else. So is that what you were talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's, you know, for me, like my fascination is around, so one of the quotes I say probably way too much to my clients, and everywhere that, you know, roll their eyes if they will, but I believe that our job as adults is to learn to reparent ourselves. So many of us are walking around with these traumas and wounds that are essentially in our nervous system from a really young age. And once that gets triggered, our nervous system responds. And however we were taught to feel safe or unsafe by expressing needs or having needs, it's how we will then translate it into our adult world. And so if the 7-year-old or the 5-year-old is operating the show, and that 7 or 5-year-old or whoever it was wasn't told or wasn't shown that actually having needs, your needs would be met, that you could be safe, that, you know, I'm going to see you and validate you, then that just translates into really these adults, children that are walking around, having all their nervous systems triggered with all of these things. And often I find, you know, I'm in the personal development industry. I get it. There's a way in which sometimes we can be stuck too much in the story and keeps us further stuck. And there's a way in which we can learn to start self-regulating and meeting our own needs and knowing that it's okay to ask for our needs to be met and feeling safe in doing so. And that's a huge one, I think, for women especially.
Yes. And I think too, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that when we talk about how, you know, a 7 or 8-year-old is running the show, we're not even conscious that that's happening, right?
Not at all.
It's like we can talk about it very logically right now, but it's like it's actually running in the background. It's like the windows that are open behind the screen that we're not even looking at right now.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a key distinction that when I learned it, I thought it was really, really important. And I also like the fact that you were talking about how to reparent ourselves. Like we think like, well, that was their job. They were supposed to do that.
Damn it.
Like you mean to tell me I got to do that for myself? No, it's like, wait, I went through that childhood already. Why do I have to do that again?
Yeah, well, that comes from a place of understanding that, you know, our parents did the best job that they could. But now we are the adult. And so we have to learn to go back sometimes and take that child and reparent her in the way that maybe we weren't parented.
Mm-hmm.
right? So maybe our needs, going on the needs topic, maybe our needs weren't met.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it wasn't safe to express our needs. Maybe we didn't feel like the adults in our world were safe, but now we're the adults, and now we're safe. And now we know what we need. And so what I mean by reparenting is literally going back to those places and, repairing, we call it work, inner child work, etc. But it actually has an effect on your nervous system. It actually can help you start to go back and heal the places in which you have been dysregulated somehow. And feel safe in your world. And when you feel safe within yourself, when you're connected to self, or my favorite word in the world, word is sovereign. When you are your sovereign self, then you're not burning out, because you're not seeking to try and get something from the external world, from your career, from success, from, having this badge of honor of I'm busy, right? This is a thing. Like, we love to say we're busy because it means we're important. And it all comes back down to the inner work. So I kind of have a little giggle when my clients refer to me as a business coach. And I have a little giggle because I'm doing all of the external work behind the business owner or the founder, and that translates into their business. And that makes me chuckle a little bit because it's kind of covert way to work on it. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And I always, like, whenever I'm doing leadership training and development, I always tell people leadership is an inside out job. Right.
Totally.
Because you don't become a good leader until on the inside you have that core, that really strong core. And to your point, it's, how have you cleared out some of the story from the past, and, whether it's rewriting it or however, the techniques are to be able to really reparent. It's so important because, our inside reflects, how we are in our outside world, right? It's
Absolutely.
not the other way around.
And I also want to say too, for the audience listening, like, this doesn't require, I don't believe, unless, and I'm going to, the caveat to this, unless if you had like some serious trauma, in which case you do need like therapy and you need deeper work. But the people that are, the business owners and the founders of the world, this, sometimes they hear this, and because, I work with such high achieving, like A-type women and men, it's like, oh, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to do that work, right? It's part of the mentality. And what I want to say is, it doesn't require hours and hours on a therapy couch. It actually just requires you being in your world and being awake to the stuff that's happening. And when you hit a roadblock, to actually be able to have the skills to back up and say, oh, what is this about? What's going on here? Like, stuff with my team is getting all funky, and what's going on? Or I'm feeling exhausted all the time and I don't know what that's connected to. And it's a matter of developing everyday consciousness around how you be in the world, right? So I always like to say that to people, because they think, oh my God, I don't have time to do this work. But the work, it's either doing you or you're doing it, right?
Right. Yes. And I love that you brought up that point, because we don't want to scare people into thinking that it's this big hard thing. It's like, the good news is that you're the expert of you. So it's just being, more clear about who you are and being able to excavate, the true you, as opposed to all the stuff that's on top of it. And I love that word sovereign. I've used it too, not as often as you though. But I love that word sovereign, because it just has like that yummy feeling of feeling safe and powerful and just, like a sovereign nation. Like, it's something
unto yourself.
Yeah, unto yourself. I love that. Great. So I do want to actually talk about, what are the 3 levels of burnout that you talk about?
Yeah, I've seen, so burnout happens on all 3 levels. So we talk about like mind, body, spirit. It happens on all of those levels. I would say that the place that burnout begins, if we want to actually, give it some geography, a place that it begins is when we start to feel disconnected from self and source. So I would call that the spiritual level. And that's when it starts. And usually it starts there, and it's very unconscious. And so, maybe we're not meditating like we used to, or maybe we aren't slowing down and just tapping into self. Maybe we aren't stopping to smell the roses. I mean, it could be just the subtlest little thing. But what I've seen in my experience is it sort of starts there, and then it seeps into the mental level. And at the mental level, when you're disconnected from that source and self, the mind gremlins start, and the unconscious, right? We talk about the unconscious patterning, like that little kid running around with scissors in your head. right? That's the mental level, right? I got to do better. I got to be better. What if I get fired and then I have to do this? And then, I want to make sure that I achieve this milestone, and that's sort of the mental level. And always, always everything that is at the spiritual and mental level. So your psychology will manifest as your physiology. And so that brings us down to the physical level. And this is where we see the actual illnesses. We see chronic fatigue. We see fibromyalgia. We see all these symptoms that we now say are burnout symptoms, right? Exhaustion, depression, anxiety, all of those things. But they all started at the mental and spiritual level. And so often what we do is we try and let me take the supplements and let me do the thing. And I am trained alternative medicine doctor. I'm all for supplements. I'm all for taking care of yourself. I'm all for good nutrition. And there's a way in which we stay stuck trying to fix it at the physical level. And we're missing all the pieces that came before we got to that physical place.
Right. So being able to look at it from the root cause, and not saying that we don't address things at the physical level. Obviously, that's what you do, right? It goes hand in hand. But I think, to your point, sometimes we're out of balance when it comes to looking at the spiritual and the physical, or, really being able to address what the root cause is. And sometimes it is a physical thing, but maybe even that physical thing has a deeper spiritual connection. And
Absolutely.
And I love how, you really keep bringing it home to the self, home to what is the connection that we have with ourselves, because like you said, and I love how you're saying it, because you're making it so easy to understand. It's when we disconnect from ourselves, there's this cascade that happens. And to your point, so give me an example, or give us an example of a client maybe that you've worked with, maybe that you've coached with, or that you've treated, that, you've really worked with on both of those, or all three of those levels.
So every single client sort of has to work on those levels. And I'll give you a couple. I mean, the best client example that I can give you is myself. Cause you you teach what you learn, right? Or teach what needs to know. But much of what happens is we get stuck, or clients have gotten stuck with addressing the physical thing. We're doers in our society. We're figure-outers. We're problem solvers, right? And all these people that, are working at that level where they're hitting that burnout, it's because they're problem solvers. It's because they're working at higher levels. So, an example would be someone who is showing up, who's either, not right at the end stages of burnout, but has gotten to burnout in the past and is afraid to do it again. And what I often see is I'm afraid to re-engage with the world. I'm afraid to re-engage with work. I'm afraid to go out and do the thing that I did before. So again, I'll give you myself as an example. I had reached a level where I was exhibiting symptoms of chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. In fact, my doctor at the time, who's an integrative doctor, said, I don't want to put that in your head, but if you went to just a regular allopathic doctor, that's what they would say you have, and you would get meds, and that would be it. And that's at the level you would stay at. But she was integrative. And so we worked around different things, and we worked around nutrition, and we worked around seeing where the deficiencies were. But I honestly didn't have an aha moment until I myself, I was in the bathroom where all great insights come from, is on the toilet.
Of course.
And I was because what was happening in my mind is I was saying, what's wrong with you? Get your bleep together, right? Come on, what is wrong? I had lost inspiration. I kept saying, I feel like I lost my mojo. I was saying, I feel dead inside. I just was flatline.
Wow.
Physically, I was exhausted. I was waking up and having breakfast and feeling great. And then by 10:30, I was I have to go to sleep. All these things were happening. And what I was doing is I kept driving myself. I kept pushing myself. What's wrong with you? Get your, together, figure this out. Do this. I was supporting myself, right? So I was my main source of income. I had to keep working. And so I was driving. And it wasn't until this moment where I literally was on the toilet, and I was wait a second. I've seen these symptoms before. I've had patients with these symptoms. This has happened before. I know what this is. And that's when the tape started to unravel for me. And that's when I had to seriously sit down and take a dose of my own medicine, because my belief system is, and it's not just my belief system, it's actually proven by science, that your physiology will match your psychology. So I actually had to sit down and say, what is going on here? Because this is beyond I'm tired and I need meds or I need something physical. Like, take those things, support yourself. And in the meantime, I had to sit back and say, there's something underneath this that has been driving me my entire life. And it may have gotten me this far, but it's not going to get me the rest of the way, because now my body is breaking down. So I always say that I'm my best patient or client to talk about, because I had to go through this myself, and I had to sort of rewind the tape and pick up the pieces. And it's funny because you have to learn how to operate in a completely different way. And what I've seen a lot in my clients is that they're either at the point of this or they've just experienced this, which is their body now, their physicalness is saying, honey, can't keep doing it that way. Can't keep going that way. And that is often for us stubborn learners. We have to hit the wall sometimes to get that lesson. But the thing is, if you don't actually get it, you just keep repeating the cycle, right? So if you just treat the physical, let's say, but you go back into your work in the same way, you're going to hit that wall again.
And I'm curious, are there certain patterns that you see more often in people that, in terms of those things that when they get to the root cause, like that's the shift that that you have to make? Because the only reason why I say that is because I know that when I had my aha moment, it was probably in the shower.
Yeah, it's always in the bathroom, right? It's somewhere. The bathroom floor, the shower, the toilet.
Like looking, doing my makeup, like, oh yeah, But I remember that, and it was so simple. It was just that I mattered. That there was just this unconscious decision that I had made a long time ago that I didn't matter, and that I had to keep trying to make sure that I mattered. And that was what was running my little hamster on the wheel, and it's just amazing how sometimes those little things can really spin out in different ways in your life. So I'm curious, have you seen any patterns in working with clients? Are there typical ways that they show up?
Patterns in the way they show up, or like what's behind the pattern?
Like what's behind the patterns?
Yeah, I mean, it circles right back to where we started, which is that do I matter, right? That need for significance. And there's a way in which asking the question, like, Brennan Burchard talks about his 3 questions, right? When he was faced with life or death. And one of them was, did I matter? And there's a way that you can ask that question in a healthy way where it comes from contribution and it comes from connection, right? But there's a way in which we ask that question that comes from, looping back to the beginning, significance. And when you're focused on significance from a place of, I didn't feel like I mattered, or I didn't feel like I was important enough, or I didn't feel like I was lovable, I didn't feel like I was enough. It really does. That is the pattern. When I break it down, it doesn't matter if I'm working with like, a small business founder, a solopreneur, like a CEO, or like an athlete. It doesn't matter who I'm working with. That is at the core. I think it's part of what I call the human disease, right? Is that enoughness and that need to be significant. And again, there's nothing wrong with having that and having a healthy expression of that. But it's the unhealthy expression, which is usually from the unconscious. We don't know it's happening, but suddenly our physical environment and our physical bodies are saying, hey, this isn't working for you anymore. So it really does. That would be the answer in terms of a pattern that I see is that. Yeah,
and I want to underscore that too. It's another golden nugget for everybody to because I want people to be able to listen and self-identify of like, oh yeah, well, what could potentially be the pattern I'm running? So if it all does stem from that significance, it's like, yeah, how is that showing up for people that are watching? Is that, is it that it's showing up that you don't feel important, or that you don't feel that you're successful enough, that you're lovable, those kind of things. And it's the fact that it's part of the human condition that we actually have these things and we're not alone, although all those things make us feel really alone. Right?
Absolutely. And our society, exactly. And our society is sort of set up for that. And, you know, what I would say is be really, really vigilant to the messages that you're taking in and question if they're true. I mean, so I just co-led a retreat in Bali with a bunch of women. And one of the women that was, one of the women that was on the retreat was a lawyer, and she's doing all this hard work because she's trying to make partner. And she took a step out to do this, you know, transformational spiritual retreat. And she was getting emails from the partners while she was on retreat. And it was like, you know, they knew that she was going away. She had told them in advance. She had taken the time. She also said, I'm going to be in the jungle of Bali. And it's like, there's hardly any reception, which there wasn't, unless it was for half an hour every evening. Right. But she was getting all these messages that were making it wrong that she took this time out, making it almost threatening her job in a sense. And they weren't actual threats, but that was the feeling that was coming up in her, was like, wait, I did this for myself. I chose this for myself because I knew that I needed this. They okayed it, but I'm still getting emails and messages that, you know, this may not be the material and this is not how you make partner. And what's really important there is that you then don't fall into that and subscribe to that, and that you have to take a stand for what's important to you, because that is, again, when we buy into the messages and we buy into what society says we have to do and how we have to perform. So we did some work around this, and actually she went back to her partners, one in particular that was sending the emails, who's normally been supportive of her, and said, look, I want to address these emails that were coming through while I was taking a spiritual retreat. And she said, you know, the reason that you want me to be partner and the reason why you want me in this firm is because I take care of myself in this way. And it's because I go away and I regenerate and I focus on self, because you wouldn't want me here and you wouldn't want me on your team, and I wouldn't be able to perform at the level that I perform if I didn't do this. And it was a huge, huge step, because that's not a stand that we take for ourselves. And to her pleasant surprise, he was like, you know, you're right. Like, I get this. Wow. So it's changing out there, but it requires us connecting to ourselves and saying, this matters. I matter. Yes. And I can show up better.
Yeah. And I got chills when you were telling that story, because I also got the sense that she was affirming that for herself. That, you know what I mean? Like, not only was it an awareness that they needed to have, but that she needed to claim it, that she really needed to own that part of her, that, yeah, you know, me taking care of myself is what makes me awesome.
Yeah. And that was part of the work that was coming up for her, and what she was having to claim the whole retreat, but time we were there, because we don't do this in our relationships. We don't do this at work. We're, you know, even in relationships, like 9 times out of 10, when I'm working with a woman around stuff that's coming up in her leadership, it's coming up in her relationship. And we don't ask for what we need in that either, because again, it's like, well, can I, like, am I allowed? Yeah. Is it, you know, and
permission?
Right. I mean, and I have a history of being involved in, you know, I would say toxic connections, toxic relationships where, you know, if I expressed my needs, I was labeled as needy. Now, we could blame that on the guy, but also my responsibility in that is I judged myself as needy. I didn't make it okay for me to have needs and to express that. And so, you know, we see burnout in relationships too, like emotional burnout from that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Now we could probably go and talk about that for another half an hour. Look at what you did. You just gave us another avenue.
That's another one, another talk.
Another one. Exactly.
Yeah. When the book comes out, we'll do that one.
Absolutely. I definitely will take you up on that. But one last question. If there's one thing that you want business women to remember, if they're dealing with overwhelm, burnout, or just overcommit themselves, you know, what's that one thing that you really want them to walk away with?
That's such a good question. I have a lawnmower happening in the background. I apologize. Okay. The first thing that came with that, when you said that, is that I want to say to you that Your way of being is going to say, speed up, do it better, figure it out, fix it, find the solution. And actually what you do need to do is slow down. You actually have to slow right down and stop and find a way to reconnect with what is true for you.
Oh my gosh, Giovanna, I love that. And thank you for being so generous today. You've given us so many golden nuggets of information that we can walk away with that are really practical and that we can use, and that'll really help us move forward. So thank you so much. And I want to remind everybody that all you have to do is click below for Giovanna's free gift. And if you haven't done so already, we do have the Backstage Pass, which is kind of like a burnout solution in and of itself, because you just get the Backstage Pass, you can download all the interviews, and you don't miss anything, and you can have it at your disposal at any time. So that is an opportunity for you, so that, again, it's stress-free, worry-free, and it's there for you. Now, the other thing is I just want to leave you with one final thought, is that instead of burning the candle at both ends, let your light burn brightly, knowing that you are more than enough. Most importantly, that you can create your own burnout solution and you don't have to do it alone. So I will see everyone on the next awesome interview, and I'll see you today at our Facebook group time later this evening, and I'll see you then. Thanks again, Giovanna. I really appreciate it.